Hello, this is Sarah from Hardcover Hearts, and I'm here today to unveil my group of books that I was given to review and rank for the BookTube Prize. The BookTube Prize, I'll put a link to the information below, but at a very high level, this is the second year of it, and it is in essence a literary prize that some members of BookTube can participate in if you're interested in books that are published in the United States from the previous year. So this is the second year that it's being done, and we had more opportunities to judge and more judges opportunities this year. There's a long list of books that were published in the United States that were both fiction and nonfiction. Robert from Barter Hordes, who kicked this off and started this huge endeavor, is the one who compiled the list, and then the judges were able to go through and help do a little bit of a culling of the list. From there, based on the number of judges, the different groups were created, and I was given Group E. We are in the Octa round, and so at this point there's a lot more books that are available to in the different groups, but it'll be culled after this round. So the idea being the top three from the different judges in my same group, the top three books proceed on. The bottom three are out of the running. And so I have other judges that are in my round, so I'm not the definitive decider of this, thank goodness, because it was really hard. But I think that it's a great opportunity to kind of experience the books that were published in the United States last year and kind of take a look at the breadth and scope of them. And it's an interesting puzzle to get a list of books and to stack rank those books against each other. So often we're used to kind of thinking about each book as a solitary event, a solitary piece of work. And that's what we do, right? But this is a different challenge because you have to read each book, you have to think of its merits, but then the merits really are in comparison and contrast to the other books in your group. I was very lucky that I received Group E, and Group E is made up of 3 literary fiction heavyweights, 2 kind of popular commercial fiction books, and then 1 fantasy book. Without further ado, let me give you a taste of the books that were in my group. I gave a little preview of this in my last Friday Reads video, my week of reading update. These were the books plus 1 that I don't have a physical copy of. And so in my group, by alphabetical order, we have Queenie by Carty-Williams. We have Ducks Newburyport by Lucy Ellman. We have Black Leopard, Red Wolf, and this is by Marlon James. We then have The Topeka School by Ben Lerner. The Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli. And then the last one that I have is The Island of Sea Women by Lisa C. So I spent a lot of time trying to think about how to expose my thought process and how I arrived at the stack ranking. So what I'd like to do is to talk about each of them a little bit, and then I'll do at the end, I'll do how that worked in conjunction with each other and how I arrived at the stack ranking. The rankings are in order of the books that I received. So if I read these independent of the BookTube Prize, I would probably rate them or rank them maybe differently. This was an exceptionally challenging thing for me to do because I don't rank books. If you look back at my favorite books of 2020, I don't do a stack ranking. And it's especially difficult here because, as I mentioned, you have different genres kind of mixed in. And so it's really hard. We're not doing an apples to apples comparison, so to speak. So I had to think about what was the experience like reading it, and how did that experience compare to the other books that I've read. If you're new to my channel, you may want to go back and look at my favorite books, because that might give you a sense of what kind of reader I am and the things that I enjoy, if you're brand new to the channel coming for specifically to look at this video. So that might give you some insight. So yeah, it was very hard to try to think in my head, like, well, what does this look like? Now, I will say that my top was obvious and my bottom was obvious. It was the stuff in the middle that really was a little kludgy and hard to work through, and I had to spend a lot of time thinking about it. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'm going to do these in alphabetical order from the last name of the author. So let's start with Queenie. So I want to talk about the expectations I had going into the book, because I do think that the expectations you have going in really set the tone for how you're going to experience the book. And so I read this before reading for the BookTube Prize. I did not go back and reread, because I had Ducks Newburyport, which is 1,100 pages. But I kept my memories of what the experience was like in my mind, and it wasn't that long ago that I read it. So coming into Queenie, I read this pretty soon after it was released, and I kept hearing that this is it's like a Black Bridget Jones set in England of a Black woman and her experiences, little Sex in the City, Bridget Jones. So my expectations were that it was popular commercial fiction, probably light, probably a romance, and that was my approach, expectations going into it. The story and the plot here is that we've got Queenie, who is our main character. Then we're following her as she's dealing with a kind of squirrely boyfriend. So she was supposed to, she's on a break from her boyfriend, Tom, and she's trying to deal with the implications of that. What does that mean to their relationship? What does it mean to her future? An interesting aspect to this relationship is that Tom is a white man. And so there's immediately issues of race and racial identity come into play. We see Queenie really struggling to understand what she's supposed to do in this situation. Tom is not really talking with her, and he has told her he needs space and he needs some time. And so she's trying to honor that, but also really evaluating herself and her self-worth and who is she without him in this relationship. She's surrounded by a group of friends that text back and forth and that seem to love her and want to support her and want the best for her. She has a job that is not living up to the expectations of what she wants to do, and so she's a little disappointed there and not really sure how to get out of it, and she's not really sure how to progress and how to build her career. And then she's dealing with issues of abandonment, issues that come to the forefront for her when she realizes that this wasn't just a short break. He broke up with her. There's trigger warnings in here for mental health issues, as well as some risky sexual behavior. The themes in this book really are self-worth, mental health, independence, poverty, racial dynamics, and family. I have to say, I was very impressed with this book because I went into it not expecting a lot and expecting, just a light fair read. I was very surprised in some of the places that the author took this character, and I was very interested in the ways she depicted the decline of her mental health and the fraying of her mental health, and how that was seen by the other people around her, but while in her point of view. I thought that was uniquely done, and I think that the conversations about mental health in her community, among her family, were very, very important and topical. So this really went above and beyond what I was expecting, and I still remember it, and I've actually recommended this to many people. Next up, let's talk a little bit about, I don't know if I'm going to be able to hold this up too long. Ducks, Newburyport by Lucy Ellman. So I went into reading this because I'm a member of an In Real Life book club, and we read the Booker shortlist and some other shortlists of other award-winning books. And so this was on our list from the Booker shortlist, and I had already started it, thank goodness. Because this is a brick. This is literally a brick. I expected this to be a tough book. I expected it to be very challenging. You hear it described as very James Joyce meets Virginia Woolf. And so I'm anticipating going into it kind of girding myself for like some really big intellectual exercise. What I found is that it's very different. It's an immersive experience to read this book. This book, the plot is very light. We are in the head and mind of an unnamed narrator. She is a middle-aged mother who is married to a very, very wonderful man that she loves a lot, with 4 children in school, different ranges from high school all the way down into, I think, elementary school. And she is struggling. This woman is struggling. She is dealing with challenges and fears and anxieties, and she's spiraling. She's an incredibly intelligent woman, and she has a lot of information. And although she is in an Ohio kitchen right now when you're encountering her, she has lived around the world. She grew up in London, and she has experienced a lot. But she's also been traumatized. She's been traumatized by the death of her mother, which almost stunted her emotional capability for dealing with things. She also is a survivor. She has survived illness. But I think that she feels less for having survived. Because of the frayed social system that we have, the safety net, so to speak, has gaping holes, as we can see now by what's going on with the coronavirus pandemic that we're living in now in the United States. This is a very, very, very timely book. So we have these spirals of anxiety peppered with endless facts. She knows so many things about so many things, and her interests are wide and varied. But we are really trapped in her mind and in her state of fear, of complete and utter fear. And we get the sense that her mental health is really under significant pressure, because she's not bringing in a lot of money. She is a baker, and she's trying to bake and trying to do this work out of her home. So there's isolation happening. There's also a very interesting subplot that's happening that gives you some breaks in the narrative, because I think as many people talk about this book, what they talk about is the endless blocks. There are no paragraph breaks in this book, so to speak. It is just this run-on. In fact, the fact that is used as a joiner between different ideas. But what you get these breaks and this different feel through the subplot of this mountain lioness with her cubs. And that offers this really nice reprieve. I found this book absolutely compelling. I think it's an important work. She was able to take something so personal and also global at the exact same time. So she's dealing with grief, with illness, poverty, isolation, fear for her children and their future, fear for her future, and a deep, deep love for her husband and her children. But she's also completely paralyzed with fears about pollution, about politics, about the healthcare system, about capitalism. She's a very, very smart woman who's in essence trapped by the fact that she has survived cancer, and now they are not doing well financially because of all of the hospital bills that they've had, and the world just seems to be spinning out of control. I think we can all relate to this. I will also agree that I think that this is a little too long. I know that sounds ridiculous because 1,100 pages is a lot. But what you find is if you invest in the time into it, it's an immersive experience. You'll lose yourself in the writing, but it's not something that you can sit and read in one fell swoop, for me at least. So other people could. I needed to read it in chunks, think about it, and come back to it. I think that the narrator is so emblematic of so many women that I actually know who are dealing with these types of challenges and anxieties. And I think that it was told in a way that forces you to look and experience it with her. And I think that's a tremendous gift in literature. I think this will last the test of time because so many things that she talks about are literally what's coming to the forefront right now. I do agree that there were parts that I think it went on a little too long, but what she ends up doing is she will tease up a topic. You won't really know what she's talking about, but she'll later expound upon it. And so you get this spiraling effect, and it provides this very interesting connection to what she's talking about. It's not just one woman babbling in her kitchen. And you see why certain things that have happened in her life create the anxieties for her for her what she anticipates to be the future for her family. I'm incredibly happy that I read this. I think it's very impactful, very important work. I'm sad it didn't win the Booker because I think it has the gravitas and the literary heft that it was, along with Joyce and Woolf, in my opinion. So that's Ducks Newburyport. I cannot believe I held it up that long. Next up, Black Leopard, Red Wolf. So my expectations going into this book were very, very high. I loved A Brief History of Seven Killings by Marlon James, the same author, which won the Man Booker Award. And was the first time that I really started watching the Man Booker Award because I was very interested in another book that was on that short list, Hanya Yanagihara's A Little Life. For this book, I was a little hesitant about the fantasy aspects of it because I don't read a lot of fantasy. I do occasionally, but not a lot. But what pulled me in was the idea of interweaving African myth in here. As you may know, I was raised in Mozambique, Africa, and so anytime I can pull on those strings and read something that has a tangential experience to it, I'm very excited for. So I walked into this book really little trepidation, but more excited than I was nervous. This book. So let me tell you a little bit about the story. So the story and the plot is that this is an action adventure story of this man named Tracker, and he has exceptional qualities. He has a nose that can smell and track people, objects, things in remarkable ways, almost superhuman ways. And so he is pulled with a band of other misfits and outsiders and criminals to find a child, a missing child. And it seems like for nefarious reasons. And so he's off on this adventure with these people that he probably can't trust to find this missing child. The other main character in this book is the Leopard, and the Leopard is kind of a man-leopard shapeshifter who can switch on and off from leopard to man. So because it's an action-adventure kind of story, I also expected there to be, at the core, friendships and this kind of adventure quest, which is filled with tasks and adventures and things that are uplifting and inspiring. And that is not at all what I got with this book. I'm just going to read some of the adjectives I was collecting as I was reading it. Unrelenting, so dark, relentlessly dark, claustrophobic, ceaselessly bleak, devoid of beauty, debasing, exhausting, vulgar, coarse, base, brutal, hopelessly violent, depressing, it's a horror show, misogynistic, gleefully horrific, a cesspool of violence and sexual violence, slavery, torture, execution, rape, degradation, torture porn, hunting people, so many dead children. So yeah, I didn't like this book. This actually made me angry every time I had to come back to it. And in truth, I actually started this and DNF'd it before the BookTube Prize ever happened. So I already knew that I was biased against it coming into it the second time. But I do know people who did like it, and so I said, okay, well, let's just do this. And I wanted to give an honest review in comparison with the other books here. And you really can't do that if you don't stay to the end. This was not a book for me. For all of those reasons that I mentioned. It was claustrophobic. I can handle a certain level of darkness if it's written with beauty, if there's a glimmer or shimmer of beauty on the horizon, and there was none here. It was a fundamentally bad reading experience for me, and I was very disappointed. So that was this one. Next up, Ben Lerner's The Topeka School. So again, I read this and I did a full video series with Juan of Bookish Islander. I will put a link to those below. Basically, I entered this with very high expectations, because it was like a literary darling, and it was getting so many accolades, and so I had high expectations going into this. It's an auto-fiction story of Ben as a young boy when he kind of goes. We go back into the 80s, in Topeka, Kansas, as he's in his last year of high school, in this very unique place in time. So in Topeka, Kansas, there is a famous institute of psychotherapists. And so we get a little bit of that community through his parents, who both work there. And he is a debate champion. And so we also start to see how debate starts to skew nationally and teach children who are going up through the debate challenges and championships to move away from debating the merits of an argument into this barrage of information, which you then try to address it point by point. And if you're not able to address all of the information, technically you lose. And so there's there are a lot of themes at play here. There are themes about masculinity. There are themes about how we arrived at our current state of the nation, politically, where we're barraged with news, but we don't fact check, and the idea of argument and debate on the merits are not there. all of these things I think are very valid and very important. I just didn't feel that they came enough to the forefront in this book, and the auto-fiction for me got in the way of the story and the narration, and I felt like there was just too much here, and it was done in a way that was too intellectual. I also I couldn't let go in my head of the fact that he is taking on the character of his mother and his father and these other people, because this is told not just through his point of view, but also from the points of view of other members of his family. But it's an interesting read, and it gave me a lot to think about, but it wasn't successful in my opinion. Again, I have much more detail about it in those other videos if you'd like to check those out. I'll leave it there. Next up is Valeria Luiselli's The Lost Children Archive. So coming into this, I knew it's been hailed with a lot of awards. I knew that it's being talked about. This is almost like Licorice, similar to the Ben Lerner. You either love it or you hate it. It seems to be the case. But it's a critical darling. It's winning a lot of awards. I was expecting it to be very, very depressing, because it's the story of a family of documentarians who are traveling across the country in search of some projects that they're working on with their 2 children. Their marriage is fraying as they're taking this trip, and at the same time, the woman, who is a documentarian as well as her husband, is doing a favor for a woman, and she's trying to help find her migrant daughters who are lost in the current system. This is contemporary today. So it sounded like a lot. It sounded like it was going to be bleak as night, dark, bleak, very sad. I was so surprised at how quickly I engaged with this book. This book is like a collage, and I think that concept of the documentarian was really used in interesting ways, because she's able to pull these random pieces, what feels like would otherwise be random pieces, and fold it into the idea of an archivist and a documentarian and someone who's pulling these disparate things together to form a narrative and a story. So we're traveling across the United States. We get to see what's different historical things that have happened at some of these places in the United States. And it's the idea about travel and about who was here and who has been displaced, and why do people travel? Why do people go on journeys? What are they looking for? So we start with this fairly intellectual process, and we're in this woman's head, and we're watching her as she's watching her husband kind of pull away from her, and her relating to her child from a previous marriage and their child together, and as they're going across the country, keeping them entertained through stories. This is one of those that if you stop too early, you miss the payoff, because there's a switch that happens. And I'm not going to spoil anything for anyone, but the narrative changes in the story in an interesting way. And I found that to be terror-inducing. My anxiety shot through the roof. Also so compelling and so beautiful. I have not cried for a book since A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. This book had me sobbing, and yet I could not put it down. I think it really marries the intellectual pursuit and the emotional realities of what's happening with migration and migrant children and the history of what's happened in the United States with such interesting ways and with such a deft approach. This is not going to be for everyone, but I think that if you are interested and can keep your mind open to experiencing and being in this woman's head as she kind of takes us on this journey, the payoff will be tremendous. And I'm not going to forget this book anytime soon. It was absolutely a remarkable reading experience. And then the last book that in this list, but not the last book I read, was The Island of Sea Women by Lisa C. So my expectation going into this book was that it's a Lisa C book. And my mother and I have loved the Lisa C books since Snowflower and the Fan many, many years ago. And Lisa C has a formula. She talks about female relationships. She sets them in interesting times historically, usually when there's some kind of strife, some kind of political overlay over them. But at the heart of it is usually about relationships, and it's usually from childhood into adulthood, and as it changes, as people change and grow, how do the relationships change, and usually there's some kind of cataclysmic situation that breaks the relationship, and then they find themselves back to each other again. And the same is true here. In this book, it's set in a very interesting scenario. This is a Korean island called Jeju, and it's a matriarchal village where the women are part of this female diving group. And they train their lungs to dive into the water, very deeply into the water, to get abalone, to get specific types of seafood that other people can't get. And they use that to feed their village as well as to sell and to make money. So already great, compelling place setting, great backstory for this group. And it's a multi-generational novel. So we really open in present day where Young Suk is an older woman, and she wants to go diving, and she sees some foreigners come, and they're looking for anyone who knows Mi Ja. And Mi Ja was her childhood friend that she's had a splitting off with, and that they've never reconciled. It's a lovely story, but it's not different per se from any other Lisa C story. And so if you like multi-generational, if you like interesting settings, if you want to learn more about this matriarchal community, and also how Korea was impacted during the war, kind of between these different sides with Japanese occupation and then what happens in World War II, this was an interesting book. But at the core of it, it is a commercial fiction book. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But you have that formula, and the formula never strays. And so I think that was too gaping for me. I knew where it was going because I know her style and I know what she's presenting. And so throughout the entire book, I was hoping that we would get something different and deviate in a way, but at the same time, kind of not, because that's what she does very, very well. So, so those are the books. Now let me tell you how I rated them. I'm going to start with the worst book, and I bet you can tell. What came in for me number 6 is the Marlon James Black Leopard, Red Wolf. I placed it last because the experience was so starkly challenging for me, and I disliked it so very much that I really did not want to read this. I hate red. I'd say the last third. Because I just was so sick of it. And it is a long, long book. Too long to be in that type of bleakness. So that came in last for me. What came in the 5th place for me is unfortunately The Island of Sea Women by Lisa C. Again, not because it was a bad book, but in comparison with what the other books that I was looking at and comparing it to, the formula just was too obvious for me. And I because I'm the one who has to review them, I couldn't look at it through any other eyes other than my own. And she's been writing for so long that many people probably have read her books and would experience the same thing as I did. So unfortunately, that came in number 5. Number 4, I have to say, it's the Topeka School. And, you know, no surprise here, because I have talked about how I just didn't connect with this book, and it didn't pull me in. While it was intellectually interesting, I didn't feel for the book, and I just didn't connect with it. Then, most interesting, for number 3, I chose Queenie. And I chose Queenie because it surprised me. It went deeper than I expected. I'm still thinking about it. And I think it did, from a story perspective, it did more interesting things than some of definitely these books below it. And I'm still thinking about it. I still worry about Queenie. And I'm still rooting for her, despite all of the challenges and all the ways that she really, really pushed my buttons. But I think this was good storytelling. I think that it brought up interesting topics that I think should be discussed. And I think this is a great way to kind of bring those to the forefront. So that ended up being number 3. So now between number 2 and number 1, number 2 for me was Ducks Newburyport. I think the thing that kept it from being number 1 for me was the length was a little too long. We could have probably dropped about 200 pages and still had the resonance and the impact. So the length felt a little extra for me. But I think it's incredibly important, and I think it's a valid piece of literary work, and I hope more people read it. And then number 1 was The Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli. I anticipate this might even appear on my best of list for the year because of the way it both intellectually captured me. The structure was interesting. I thought the characters were interesting. I thought how she laid out so much information and took us on such a long journey, and at the same time really got into our heart and just squeezed it. I was a blabbering mess for, I would say, about the last third of this book. But that it was cathartic, and forced me to look at some harsh realities that I was too afraid to look at and too afraid to feel, quite frankly. And she took me there, and with deft hands, and the ending I thought was tremendous. It did a lot for me. This book did a lot for me, and so that's my number 1. So I can't wait to hear your thoughts, and if you've read any of these, and how you would stack rank this group. Thank you so much for watching this very, very long video. I look very much forward to judging the next round. Thank you so much. Bye.